for your video thumbnail and your image to not show up in that live stream, feel free to turn off your video now. But that stream will be starting soon, and that's the housekeeping. So how are we going to start? Well, we're going to start with asking you a question. So I have a poll which I'm going to try to launch now, and we'd love for your thoughts on the question that is posed there. So the well-being program in my workplace is adding what kind of value to the employees that it serves? So few responses coming in. Thanks for being honest. If your organization maybe doesn't have a well-being program, we have 1 or 2 people who are in that position, but you're in the right place to learn about establishing one. Let me see how many people do we have. Just wait for another few more. 3 people left. Last chance. Okay, I think we're pretty much there. So I am going to end the poll and share results. So you should be able to see the results now. And as you can see, we've got a bit of a range, I suppose. We've got a few people who 20% don't have a wellbeing program, and then there's a nice range across the rest. So, you know, 4 people say that their wellbeing program is making a significant value to employees. So well done if you're part of that wellbeing program in your organization. Thanks for sharing there on the poll. I'll just pull down that poll now. And next we'll move on to meeting our panel members. So first up, we're going to say hello to Adele. Adele, would you like to say hello to everyone and just give a little introduction, please?
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Adele, and I am an assistant professor in Trinity College. And my background is in organizational psychology. So I have looked at things such as leadership, trust within organizations, employee silence within organizations, and obviously now well-being. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Adele. Next up, we're going to meet Brian. Brian, I will just ask you to introduce yourself, and I'm going to add a little spotlight for you so you show up.
Lovely. Love a bit of a spotlight. Thank you, Shay. And hi, everyone. Great to see everyone today and to see so many people joining in. So yeah, Brian is my name. So I'm the founder of Workplace Wellbeing Ireland. It's a community to kind of bring people together to share and to learn in the area of workplace health promotion. And just through all the podcasts, webinars, and content that we share, and there's a newsletter there as well. A couple of years ago, I was asked to lead the postgrad in workplace wellness, then at Trinity, at Tangent. And since then, we've developed a masterclass series and a number of programs through that. So a lot of it focus on workplace health promotion. So looking forward to our panel discussion today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brian. And last but not least, we're going to say hello to Tony. Tony, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Tony Vickers. I moved over to Dublin in February. My mother was Irish, and I've got grandkids over in Clontarf, so it was a bit of a homecoming. But yeah, I've done a range of work. I was HR director for about 30 years, primarily in the NHS and civil service. I was Public Health England's first HR director in 2013. And obviously, public health has had a huge impact on all of us over the course of the last 2 years in particular. I retired in 2020, but my last 18 months I spent as a chief advisor at the CIPD. Basically, the role was to go around to all the 150,000 or so CIPD members and actually talk about the importance of HR in ensuring the ethical management of organizations and their input into communities. And I spent a lot of time towards the end of my career focusing on equality and diversity, on well-being and staff engagement. So that's me.
Great. Thanks a million, Tony. So you may be retired, but still wanting to keep abreast of things and attending these sort of events. So thanks very much for being here. Much appreciated. Okay, that's the panel introduced, everyone. So we're going to move on to the first topic, and for each of these topics I will be popping in the topic into chat so that everyone knows what we're talking about, and I'll also be popping in the question that we're discussing at the moment. So we're going to start off with a broad topic just on general workplace well-being, and we'll have quite a broad introductory question on that. So the question we're going to discuss is, just so we're all on the same page, what is workplace well-being? So it's very broad. I think we're going to start off with Brian on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Shay. So good place to start, like I said, so we're all on the same page. So workplace well-being, for me, it's any workplace health promotion activity or an organizational policy that's designed to support healthy behavior in the workplace and to improve health outcomes. So that could be anything from a physical activity step challenge to a mental health awareness training, right up to a policy, an organizational policy, like it might be a flexible working policy or a parental leave policy, something like that.
Great, brilliant. Thanks, Brian. Adele or Tony, any like additions or other thoughts on that?
Should I kick off? Yeah, I mean, I think these days that people want to work for organizations that are well respected, that do the right thing. And I think that an important part of well-being is that you feel a commitment to your organization's objectives and the way it does business. A number of young people I've spoken to talk about industries that they just would not work with because it would make them unhappy. It would make them feel that they're not doing their best for society. And so I think that's an important aspect to look at as well.
Nice, interesting. Yeah, so people are starting to rule out certain industries or sectors just because they don't align with their values, or yeah, brilliant. Yeah,
and I suppose it's kind of taking it to a broader level within organizations. It's creating that well-being culture, where people feel that they're able to speak up, that there is kind of a psychological safety within the organizational culture, that they feel safe, that they feel that there is flexibility for them to express their needs. So all these kind of things are important for well-being within organizations. It's not just down to only having healthy habits. It's as also Brian was saying, is kind of bringing that back also to policy levels within organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Brian always mentions he always uses the phrase random acts of wellness. So and maybe he uses the example of just having fruit in a bowl. It's way more than that. So we've another kind of, we'll stick on this topic maybe for a moment and like drill in a little bit and consider how maybe COVID, we don't want to talk about COVID too much, but how COVID maybe has helped bring well-being more into focus. So, we've all lived through it for the last couple of years. We're kind of emerging from it. So where are we now given the current situation? So Brian, I might get you to start on that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the outset, I suppose we had the initial scramble to get everyone set up to work from home. Didn't mean companies or organizations that could support that. There was that scramble, that focus to get people set up and online. But then it was nice to see, not every organization, but in quite a few, there was also the secondary scramble was then to say, well, how are we looking after our people? What's the well-being like of our workforce? So that was a really positive focus. I don't think we would have seen that maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. So that certainly happened. So for a period of time, I think well-being was a real priority for organizations. If we fast forward to today, I think there's no question it slipped down the pecking order a little bit. I mean, the priority at this moment in time is hybrid working and getting people set up, or fixing that model or sorting out that model. That's the priority, and followed closely, I would say, by talent attraction and retention. That's a real focus for companies. So I think it's our role here on this call, everyone on the call, to ensure that it doesn't slip any further down the priority list, that we keep well-being as a focus area, and we do what we can to build on the good work that has happened over the last couple of years. I think that should be a real focus for everybody.
Great, thanks, Brian. Janet's just popped in a interesting comment saying that I think it's related to COVID. You're saying, Janet, that it's made organizations realize that employees are actually people, which is always a good thing. And thanks as well. I'm going to guess it's the surname's Carol, but the aspects of work and more challenging aspects of work. Okay, yeah, to consider both the good and the bad. I think COVID's helped with that as well. Tony, you were maybe going to build on what Brian said.
Yeah, I think it's really given emphasis to HR as well. HR departments, occupational health departments, well-being departments, that they are absolutely crucial to the operation of the business. And those organizations that didn't invest in the well-being of their staff, where managers didn't actually reach out to people, even if it was through Zoom, to kind of check how they were, they were called out on the national media, they were called out on social media. And organizations that do let this drop down the pecking order do it at their peril. And I think that Brian mentioned about talent acquisition, talent retention. Yeah, it's a worldwide issue at the moment. But one of the best ways to protect yourself against that is to ensure that you look after your team, to look after your staff, that you look after each other. And, people will want to work in organizations like that. I don't think the world has ever been so perilous, for the last 60, 70 years. So people want organizations to look after them and to feel that they can look after each other when they're there.
Great, thanks, Tony. I guess, Brian, you mentioned a hybrid working policy, which obviously, getting that right will inform and lead to better, flexibility and well-being, I suppose, for your employees. So if that's the top priority at the moment, do the panel think that that's the right focus?
Well, I think it's definitely important to look at hybrid working. It's, COVID has pushed, the way we work forward. Probably the change wouldn't have happened as rapidly if COVID didn't exist, really. But I think, hybrid working needs to be looked at, especially like if we look at it from a psychological perspective. It does bring a lot of flexibility, and a lot of people are happy with it because they can work from home, or they can, arrange their caregiving time if they have kids or elderly parents, or maybe somebody that they need to take care of. But it also has, some bad sides, so for example, people might be feeling isolated. Employees that are starting off might not get to meet their team, or might not even be, be clear about what the role is within the organization. So, understanding the psychological impact that hybrid working has is definitely extremely important for employees' well-being, obviously. Yeah.
Great, brilliant. Thanks, Adele. A nice comment from Catherine about how some leaders see well-being as maybe been a bit fluffy. So I think, Catherine, where one of the topics we'll talk about a little bit later is about strategic actions and how maybe to build well-being into your long-term strategy. So we'll cover that in a little bit. But maybe now I'm just looking at the time, maybe we'll move on to the next topic. So the next topic is on everyday workplace culture and small wins. I'm just going to pop that into chat there, so just bear with me. And the first question that we're going to ask in that is it possible to integrate a small wins approach into a well-being program? So I think we're going to start with Adele on that one.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to have small wins within the well-being programs, as long as that's not limited to that. So small wins give us the sense of progress. It gives us the idea that we're creating change within the organization. So that is extremely important. But then obviously that needs to be applied to the whole organization. And as I was saying earlier, within the organizational culture. However, I think that small wins are important because they give the organization, and specifically organizational leaders and also human resource departments, what works and what doesn't work. How are employees receiving this change? Are they resistant to this change? Are they not resistant? Are they happy to have this change, this well-being change within the organization? So it can give, leaders kind of some ideas of how they can implement change in a bigger scale within the organization. So that's more or less what I think about having small wins approach.
Nice. So maybe, you try something, test it out and iterate from there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Brian, Tony, any bills on that?
Yeah, I think particularly if you're working in a large organization, the cultures will be different. If you're working in a laboratory, if you're working in an office, if you're working in a operations site, manufacturing, that may be all part of the same organization. So I think it's really important that the well-being activity is developed at local level, and use the teams to actually come up with what matters to them. And if you've got some core issues that applies to everybody in an organization, and perhaps I'll cover that when I talk a bit more about the strategic side, that's great. But then have that flexibility at local level to have smaller operational issues, but which might be much, much more important for individuals in those particular areas, and let them develop them themselves.
Yeah, so that's interesting, Tony. I suppose let's assume that, Catherine mentioned that some leaders maybe might find it fluffy, and maybe some people can't be bothered putting the time in, some employees. So like, have you ever seen that sort of interaction with an employee base done really well in an organization to try to see what the needs are?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a sort of staff network, an employee network, whatever you want to call it, and whereby they've got real responsibility. So these are people who represent perhaps particular different protected characteristics, but which could actually all have an impact on well-being. So, for example, at Public Health England, probably one of our most successful staff network was the Muslim staff network, which was looking after the rights and the work culture of people from a Muslim background, but also kind of helped people kind of work in their local communities at the weekends to actually support the local communities. And it was a great impetus for well-being amongst that group of staff. And a number of other groups set up and kind of took advice from the Muslim network as to how to develop themselves. The Christian network took advice from the Muslim network on setting up a Christian network, which I think is just great. And all of these groups had real impact because they had access to the chief executive. They were able to meet him on a personal basis and actually talk about the issues in the organization that worked well and didn't work well for their particular groups. But every single group had a real emphasis on well-being as well as diversity and inclusion.
Great. I know, leadership support is one of the key steps in the framework that we'll go through in the program, and that's one of the master classes that we'd be covering. But Brian, maybe you've got some builds there on what Adele or Tony have said.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it can be, if you're thinking about, there are frameworks that you can follow to develop a program. But if you are starting out as a well-being leader, as a HR leader, it can be daunting if you're thinking, I've got to start a whole program here. So absolutely, small wins are incredibly valuable. It might be a small initiative initially. You can learn from that, as Adele was saying. You can gather a small little bit of data around that. Hopefully that will be successful. You can get engagement. You can share some of those. You can share that story. You can celebrate that win with senior leadership team. Just get that little bit more buy-in from them. So when success breeds success, so you're building on the success of a small initiative, that's leading to more and more teams in your organization are finding out about it, and word spreads like that. And I mean, what is that? Little behaviors over time. That's what a culture is. So it's small wins, small behavior change over time leads to that, our ultimate goal, which should be a culture of health.
So how, Brian, might you deal with, so organizations will have history with other like initiatives that maybe didn't go well or disappeared. So how would you maybe deal with that in an open way, because there might be apathy towards these things?
Sure. Well, I would say if there is that history there before, then start from scratch. See, can you build a shared ownership for well-being across the organization? Can you rather than having one person in a team or as an individual or in a small team in a silo trying to run everything, lead everything, develop everything, reach out to a network across the organization. Can you create a team of well-being champions where everybody, let's say that there's a marketing person, there's a shift worker in there, there's a parent, there's a non-parent, there's the part-time worker, the full-time employee. Every kind of department and location is represented in some way, shape, or form. All the different voices. Get input from these people. They can be the developers, the designers of your program. Plus, they're listening to people on the ground. They're feeding back what's working, what's not. Give them kind of ownership of what's going on. Well-being should be shared by everyone and not just by one person or team in a silo.
Great. Makes sense. Tony's nodding there, so he definitely agrees with that. Two questions that came in on chat. The first I'll cover is from Janet. It's kind of related. Do we think that well-being of an organization needs to come from the top down or the bottom up? Who'd like to
What's the
cover that
question
one.
again?
Should well-being in an organization come from the top down or the bottom up, or maybe both ways?
Well, I think it's both directions. It's if we're talking about champions, then we have people within teams that are kind of trying to create that culture. But then obviously we need leaders to, create those changes necessary within organizations to create well-being. So there needs to be a change, for example, in policies within organizations that maybe comes more from the human resources department. But then leaders need to, allow, for example, champions to do whatever they're doing for well-being. And also they need to lead by example. They need to understand what the needs are within the organization. So for example, now that we're talking about hybrid working, some leaders are resistant to this change, some leaders are really open to the change. So it all depends on what's, the organizational needs are. So the change needs to go, I definitely think, from both directions. I don't know what Brian and Tony think.
I think there's general nodding happening, yeah.
If the chief executive isn't seen as the well-being champion for the organization, then any policy is going to fail. If people see the chief executive treating people in a way which isn't in line with all the stuff that they're preaching, then it just goes backwards. And also you won't get people at more junior levels coming forward because they'll see it's a hypocritical culture. So why would people actually push themselves above their day jobs to actually do something when they see the top of the organization just not behaving appropriately? So it's a real mix. And I think I've seen research articles talking about introducing a well-being culture appropriately at all levels is perhaps the most difficult thing a management team can do. If they can crack that, they can crack any business issue.
Okay, all right, yeah. Sounds good. Building on that, we've another question from the live stream on LinkedIn from James, and it's around trust. So James is suggesting that some employers are only playing lip service when it comes to well-being, and employees don't trust what they're doing. So how would the panel counteract that problem?
Yeah, I mean, mental health first aid is an example of that. It's a really good product, but which some organisations have implemented and said, okay, we've cracked mental health support. I've heard stories about HR departments telling people who have talked about the potential for them to commit suicide, saying, well, go and speak to your mental health first aider, rather than the manager dealing with these issues. So there is a danger that people buy in products, they implement it, and they say, okay, we've done it. And that's why this whole issue about metrics and looking at how well-being affects performance and how effective your well-being policy is really key. And again, I'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Brilliant.
And sorry, Tony, and that goes back to, I think, the organizational culture. I think a lot of organizations have things like, healthy eating programs, or maybe they might have, the gym there accessible for all staff members, but then there are overworking staff. So there is a contradiction there and a cognitive dissonance for employees, right? So on the one side, they're given all this well-being programs, but on the other side, they can't even access those programs because they're overworked, or they don't, or if they even go to those, I don't know, if they maybe spend 2 hours in the gym and they come back, the leader might not be happy with that employee. So, it's trying to balance that and trying to make sure that if you're giving access to employees to, all the well-being programs, then the culture needs to actually believe that well-being is fundamental for employees. So there needs to be congruence, I suppose, between what you're giving your employees and what the organization believes in.
Absolutely. And Shay, if I could as well, just to echo what Adele and Tony have said there. So to James's specific question on trust, and I could almost repeat my previous answer. In a lot of organizations where the trust has broken down, if they see is it the HR leader or the senior leadership team rolling out a well-being initiative or a well-being program, and it's going to fall flat on its face, because it's going to be seen as, oh, here we go, here's this leadership team just rolling it, just another initiative to try and squeeze some extra productivity out of us, or just another PR exercise here. So it's by, if you can, empower and include your network of wellbeing champions who are almost like staff reps for each of their locations. Empower them, get them in on day one to, can you help them? Can they help you define the role of a wellbeing champion at your organizations? Can you empower them to do that? Can you empower them to define, how much time will they be spending on this? What does the role look like? What's the tenure like? What kind of activities will they be involved with? How much say will they have? What's the reporting structure? All of that. So it'll take time. It'll take time to kind of roll this out, but you can get some fantastic workshops going. You'll get some brilliant ideas. You get some excellent feedback, and it's a way to kind of not hand over ownership, because it should still be led. We need some one person or team still responsible, but it's a real kind of network of a team throughout the organization where there's kind of genuine empowerment there, and people have a say in well-being in the workplace.
Great. Yeah. Rory's popped in a comment into chat, which echoes what you just said, Brian, around talking to people as early as possible. Nullig is agreeing on that comment. But Rory, I just want to try to get through all the comments before we move into the next topic. And there is one that's pending, and it's from Victoria. And I think it's an interesting question. Like, so if we've talked to the employees, we've gotten this team of wellbeing champions, they're doing great. Like, how do you keep them driven, given that it's not their full-time job? How do you protect time for them to do their wellbeing work?
Yeah, it's down to the line manager to make sure it happens. And if a line manager is saying, well, I'm sorry, but I want you to concentrate on X, Y, and Z, and this well-being stuff isn't a core part of your job, and the individual has the opportunity to actually go and speak to the champion for that area and say, look, I understand why this person's saying that, but it's getting in the way of me being able to operate effectively. And I think to have those discussions at an early stage, and to refer it to a more senior person if needs be. And in the final instance, I think what's happened with COVID is that people who've never lost a close relation or have never worried about the morbidity or the mortality of friends now have. Everybody knows somebody who's died. Everybody knows somebody who's been seriously ill. So let's hope that even the most intransigent line managers have been humanized by this and realize that, well-being is key, that they've had to have worries, and they've had to deal with work at a time of worry. And, work should be somewhere where people can escape from sometimes their nightmarish experience. If somebody is in a situation of, say, domestic abuse, their safe place may be the workplace. And so, managers need to realize just how important their role is. And it's not just about leaving stuff at the workplace door. It's actually helping people's overall well-being experience, not just their well-being at work.
Great. Okay, thanks, Tony. We're going to move on to the last topic. And it's around, so we've talked about what well-being is, we've talked about small wins, now we're going to talk about longer term strategy. So the question that we're going to ask here is, how might an organization make the leap from small wins to a long-term strategy? And, can both approaches coexist, the small wins and the long-term strategy? So I think, Tony, we're going to go to you first on this one.
Yeah, I mean, when the bottom line starts to creak, as it is in so many organizations at the moment, the shareholders, the finance director, the board of directors are going to say, well, just prove to us that all this activity that's taking place is actually beneficial. I know it's the right thing to do, but is it the right thing for the business? And, we should never lose the impact of saying it's the right thing to do, but we need to back that up with metrics. And the National Forum for Health at Work, which is a UK-based organisation, but which Brian, for example, presented to a couple of months ago on the Work Happening in Ireland. This is a group of about 40 to 50 HR directors, wellbeing directors, medical directors of big organisations, places like Barclays, places like BP, Shell, Rolls-Royce, Cabinet Office, and so on. And they're just about to launch a new metrics report about how organizations, be they small or be they large multinationals, can actually look at measuring the impact on the business and on their people of the wellbeing activity. and it talks about how you can compare with others in your industry, the sort of things which are inward looking, in the organization, the things that are about society and how an organization can actually protect its employees, in an area, for example, where there's high levels of obesity. What can an employer do to improve the general health of an individual team member? So I think what needs to happen to actually get that ongoing buy-in is that organizations have got to measure well-being in the same way that they would measure financial performance, in the same way that they'd measure marketing performance. So it becomes part and parcel of the business. And I think it's really important that at senior levels in particular, but gradually through the whole of the organization, that people have got a well-being objective in their annual appraisal objectives. So in the first instance, that might be something which is chosen by the individual. So for example, manager X, I want you to choose one area in your team that you think could help, benefit the operation of the team. One area of well-being. I'll let you choose what it is. I'm not going to say you're wrong or you're right. I'm going to let's see how it goes. And then we'll look at it again next year, see if the impact it's had. We'll be able to measure that and see if it's something that needs to continue or that we need to change the emphasis. So give people that real responsibility at all levels to actually make the decisions and to kind of make it work for them. Key thing is to obviously get the engagement of their teams, and that can be developed through the trust that we've talked about already. But if you want to have a long-term strategic thing, it's got to be part of the business fabric. It's got to be measured. It's got to be seen as just as important as financial performance and marketing performance and operational performance. And it's got to be a key thing that managers at all levels see as a key responsibility for their day-to-day. And, some managers may say that's just too much for them. Managers who have never been asked to do this may actually think, well, do I want to work in this sort of a framework, or should I look more at the technical side of my work? I've seen so many managers who've been appointed into people management responsibilities, and they've not been successful because they just haven't got the skills. They've never been asked to do so. And if you ask Kerry Cooper, who chairs the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work, Kerry was the president of CIPD, and he's a professor of organisational psychology at Manchester Business School. If you ask him what's the key issue for wellbeing at work, he would say the effectiveness of an individual line manager.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And that forum that you mentioned earlier was the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work, Tony. Yeah, because someone was asking.
The UK National Forum. Yeah.
Great, brilliant.
Shay, can I just say there, and building on what Tony said there, I mean, I'm all about keeping it as practical as possible, because I'm a recovering project manager, so I like to see how do I actually, put what Tony has said into practical steps. And so the framework that we use, which we're going to be talking through on the first session next week, it's the 8-step framework. So step one of that, and this is a process, by the way, it takes time, but it's you're building on committed and aligned leadership to wellbeing, bringing the leadership team with you. Step 2 is creating that team of wellbeing champions. Step 3 is gathering your meaningful data. And then, once there's your first 3 steps, they're your people steps. And once you have that, you have a clearer picture of what the needs and wants of your leadership and your entire organization is, and you've aligned them with your values and the vision of the organization. Then you can document that in a wellbeing operating plan. And can you document it then in a way that is, a lot of organizations will have their 2023 to 2027 strategic plan. If you've documented that in a detailed way, can you include that now on that strategic plan? So it's very practical, it's very strategic, it's going into the organization's strategic plan for whatever that next kind of cycle is. And if you're out of cycle, you're maybe doing a 1-year wellbeing operating plan or a 2-year, but try and sync up with that overall, with the organizational strategic plan.
Brilliant, thanks, Brian. Adele, any thoughts on final topic?
Yeah, I obviously agree with everything that Tony and Brian are saying. And one thing I want to add is, the importance of measurement. I think organizations don't realize, or even employees don't realize the importance that measurements have, because sometimes we create programs and we put objectives in place and we prioritize certain objectives, but it's only once we measure that we can actually understand what the priorities are. You know, we might be working towards an objective, and then it's when we look at the measurements and the data we collected, we might realize, okay, maybe that was not the the objective that we had to look at. Maybe we need to take a step back and look at something else before that. So measurements really give us a lot of insight of what is happening within an organization, you know, and where the issues are coming from. Is it, you know, at the leadership level? Is it at an employee's level? Because that's where we get the information, you know. Are employees happy in their work? Are employees feeling that, you know, leaders are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and so on? So measurements, I can highlight the importance of measuring what's, you know, what you're doing within an organization.
Makes sense. Thanks, Adele. I suppose in my head there's a couple of obvious things I might want to measure in my well-being program, but I'm going to ask the panel, is there any like novel metric that you've seen been measured that you thought worked really well, or you've experienced was something that you think all organizations should measure?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned about the external societal issues. I mean, like financial well-being is really key. I mean, so many people who work are still in poverty by the definitions of poverty, you know, particularly single parents, particularly people from protected characteristics. And so, you know, for an organization to be able to look at and to have develop the trust for individuals to share their financial issues with them and to see how they can actually benefit that's something that I think has had a huge impact over the course of the last few years, and obviously with the cost of living crisis now, even more important. And, you know, look, getting people to be open about their social and family networks. You know, if people are having a distressful time at home because of relationships, you know, it's not about leaving that outside. It's about being able to have a relationship with the manager where you can share that, because it's going to impact on the performance. You know, if a manager says, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in that, then that individual is not going to be operating at the level that they could be. So it's a win-win situation. It's the right thing to do, and it's also the right thing for the business.
If I could add to that, I will say, rather than think about metrics first, think first about, in 1 year's time, when we're in a presentation, we're in a meeting room with all our key stakeholders from the business, and we're showing them, here's how we got on this year. What are they gonna want to see on the screen? What are your key stakeholders' objectives? What are they looking to see? Are they interested in talent attraction and retention, as we've mentioned? If so, maybe your metrics, working back then, you're going to need some metrics around that area. Maybe it's financial outlay simply. Maybe how much is this costing us, and what's the return on investment? Or maybe they genuinely want to know about the health behaviours or health outcomes across the year. So you've got a baseline at the beginning of the year, when you're starting out, and you want to see if there's any kind of change, any positive change in it over the course of the year. So think about it from that point of view, then work backwards to your metrics. And I would say, we spoke about small wins earlier, if you're trying to do everything in year one, it's probably not going to be a success. I would rather focus on those small wins, niche down, certainly in year one, just, you know, a few metrics, key metrics on what your key stakeholders are looking to see.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. We're almost at time, everyone. So I'm just going to rob the stage for a second and move into my program promotion side for a little bit. So I'm just going to share a single slide, and it just gives a little bit of an idea into the wellbeing program that we will be running from next week. We have 3 masterclasses that will happen on a weekly frequency over June, and we'll be covering, you can see the session titles towards the bottom. The first session will be, as Brian said earlier, introducing an 8-step framework for sustainable workplace well-being, and then we're going to dive into more detail on some of the people-focused steps around that framework, namely the business case / leadership support for your well-being program, and then, like we've just been talking about, measurement and gathering well-being data and tracking it. If anyone is interested in learning more about that program, there's a couple of things you can do. You can check out more detail on the program page. You can send me an email to an email address that I'm going to share in chat right now, and you can also book some time with me on my calendar if you want. Apologies, I'm kind of distracted because I'm trying to put all those links into chat, but I've just put into chat the program page link the email address which you can get me on, and the last link then is a link to my calendar booking tool where you can book some time with me. The program is starting next week, so registrations are closing at the end of this week. So do get in touch soon if you are interested. And that is us pretty much at time. I know it's lunchtime. I don't want to take any more of anyone's time if you do need to head off. For people that do have a burning question that they'd like to ask the panel, you know, stay on and maybe we can stay for another 5 minutes, and feel free to ask that question verbally if you'd like. Thanks for the people that are leaving. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you found it useful.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So if anyone wants to stay on for a question, feel free to speak up now. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Hopefully you've got some ideas and maybe some actions that you'll take. Yeah, Brian? So
I'm just going to say, Kim on LinkedIn here is asking, can you advise on building a wellbeing culture in a busy startup non-profit? Mm-hmm. So my first reaction would be, if it's a startup, you're talking small numbers, so maybe 5, 10, 15 people, I don't know. But you've actually got, I think some people might think, oh, we're tiny, we're small, we've no money, and we can't do anything. But you've actually got a huge advantage over a large organization. I mean, especially if you're the leader. So build a culture. Your actions is the culture of the organization. If you're taking a break at lunchtime, getting out for a walk, and you're encouraging others to do the same, that's kind of going to be the norm in that organization. Encouraging people to switch off laptops at 4 p.m. on a Friday. That's going to be the norm. You know, not sending emails after 6, 7 p.m. midweek or weekends. That's going to be the norm in that organization. That's your foundation for a culture of health. And then any initiatives you run in the future is going to be built on top of that foundation, and they're going to be all the more successful as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some fantastic small businesses where, you know, the manager knows everybody. They understand everybody. You know, that they are. Particularly if they're living in the same local community. So, as Brian said, it's a great opportunity and it's a great advantage to really make it work for a smaller organization.
Yeah, and they can also kind of brainstorm with the employees because they're such a small organization. So they can actually just throw it out in a blackboard, you know, what is it that we can do for well-being at a physical level, at an emotional, psychological, within your role, and so on. So, yeah.
Nice, great. Yeah, I've a personal story I'll share. The last company I used to work for wasn't that small, but they did hire, I suppose, about 100 people each year, and I was in the L&D department. And the director of the L&D department, her first task was to get everyone's name down as soon as possible. All those new hires get their name down, and then she'd make a point of going around and almost shouting them out and saying hello to everyone. And she managed to get all the names. It was very impressive. But that definitely set the culture at the start. I think maybe that's it. I don't see any new questions in chat. So again, thanks very much, everyone. Thank you very much to the panel. Thanks for your time and your thoughts. Really appreciate it. Josh, thanks for the support with the streaming. That was really great to have that going as well. And we had some questions in from the live stream. So that's it, everyone. We'll say goodbye. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you. Soon.
Bye-bye.
Great. I think